And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 100 and... Oh, one sec. Sorry, I have a separate thing over here which should be on mute. Where's the volume gone? Oh dear, right, okay. There we go. Apologies for that. Messed up by the technicals already. I've decided to have a tablet on the side so I can read the comments without having to look at the screen and bounce back. That might become clear later. However, having the tablet on meant that the volume was up and it runs a few seconds behind the screen here. So everything more complicated. So let's start again. Welcome to episode 198 of Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres. Today we're going to be looking at the notion of water. So, Robert won the Smug Points for the month of May, and when I asked him what he would like the challenge to be about coming up, he suggested the idea of water. Now, water is a huge topic, so I'm going to be giving you some ideas for that. So make sure you get a pen and paper handy, or a pencil, or something to just scribble down a couple of notes, I think. Or have a little notepad opened on your desktop or something to scribble some ideas, because there will be ideas to scribble down here. But we will talk a bit more about that. If you happen to be watching live, then leave me a comment. Let me know who you are, where you're from, and what the weather's up to. And we'll get the chat going. Yes, so if I click here and I click there, and let's do this. Yes, one day I will get the hang of how to do this. We're at episode 198. In 2 episodes, it will be 200th 200th episode of this. And I still get messed up with the technicals every time. However, we're all human here. Most of us, at any rate, or at least trying to do a damn good job of attempting to pretend to be. So today then, yes, it's water is our subject. And like I say, Robert from Texas won the Smug Points. So let's do a little kind of quick Smug Points roundup. So for anybody just tuning in, thinking what on earth are Smug Points? Smug Points are points you are awarded for contributing to the podcast. And there are a different amount of Smug Points you can gain. So by turning up and saying hello, just typing something into the comments right now, live, letting me know you're here, you get an automatic 5 Smug Points for doing so. And then if I do a challenge and you contribute an image to the challenge, you get 10 Smug Points for that. And on top of that, within each challenge, I pick my top 3, which gives you a bonus 30, 20 or 10, depending on whether you're first, second or third Smug Points for that. But we also do feedback and critique. I was about to say fatigue, but feedback and critique. And if you submit an image and I give you feedback on it live in one of these episodes, then you get a bonus 25 Smug Points. And periodically I dole out the extra Smug Points here and there. What happens then is at the end of each month, the person who has gained the most Smug Points gets to choose the following challenge. And if across a quarter, you get the most Smug Points across 3 months, then you get to choose a topic for a whole episode which is specifically on what you would like to learn more about you, or it can be entirely about feedback on your images. It becomes a podcast dedicated totally to you. Now, the way we've gone here, Robert won the most Smug Points for May, and so he said he wanted to do a water challenge. So water being such a huge topic, that's what I'm going to be talking about today. But just to give you a quick rundown of the current Smug Points Leaderboard. Currently for June, VG and Robert are neck and neck at 45 Smug Points, and Nadia is running a close second with 40. But then Sandra has put in something for critique, so that will give her a bonus 25. So everything's kind of still to play for. And in the second quarter, our top 3 here are Robert is running in the head here, quite a lead here with 180 smug points. Andy is running second with 140, VG at 125, April and Meg tied at 115, and Robert Schaefer and Nadia both have just over 100 as well. So there is still possibilities, because there's still a couple of weeks left in June for trying to make it up to who maybe gets the second quarter of the smug points. Now, the first quarter of smug points, VG won, and so she's wanting me to talk about group photography. So I'm going to be talking about that next week. Anyway, I will go into more details about what we'll be going to do over the next 3 weeks at the end of the podcast. So make sure you stick around for that. Okay, so where are we then? That's smug points, and that's what's coming up. Yes, so the notion of water. So, and let's see, we've got comments in already. Let's just check and see what the comments are. So April joins us from a beautifully sunny day in Long Island, New York. And happy Father's Day. Of course, yes, it's Father's Day today. It certainly is in the UK. Looks like it is in North America too. I don't know whether it is across the rest of the world. But yes, Father's Day. I've had Father's Day greetings from my own kids. I phoned my own father earlier to wish him a happy Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to all you out there who are fathers, all you who have fathers, all of you who had fathers, all of you who have at least a reasonable relationship with your father. It's one of those days, yes. It's a nice marketing ploy, but it's also a good excuse to get in touch with your dad if you can, or if you are a dad, for your kids to get in touch with you if you're still on speaking terms with them. Right, okay. So yes, happy Father's Day. And Nadia joins us from a very wet Fife. Robert joins us and says, howdy all from Texas. Susan says it's another wet and miserable day in Kirkcudbright. And yes, it's pretty wet and miserable here in Castle Douglas too. Sandra says, hi everyone from a warm and sunny Birmingham. And Janet says, hello from a warm Mississauga, although it's supposed to get hot and humid this coming week. 22 degrees C today, predicted to feel more like 42 degrees C tomorrow. Whoa, 42. Can't imagine that. 42 and humid, that's VG in India weather, that is. Susan's asking Robert if he got his dirty pixels sorted out. That's right. Anybody watching last week, the notion of hot pixels showing up at nighttime photography. Meg says hello everyone, and all right, Janet's also April's also saying about Janet about hot weather on its way. Right, okay, we have people, we have a topic. I have pictures to show you, so let's make a start. So what we're going to be talking about then is water. And actually what I will do is, because like I say, water is a very, very big topic. There's so many different ways you can talk about water, and we're going to be setting a water challenge. And this is the important bit here, is the notion of doing these challenges is because most of you who tune in to watch these podcasts are also on various photo sites like PhotoCrowd, Guru Shots, Viewbug, and or you belong to camera clubs. And all these kind of places tend to have topics, competitions, contests, which we enter, and we want to improve our ability we want to work our way up the leaderboard. Ideally, we want to be able to submit winning pictures, or pictures that get highly commended or bonus points, or all this kind of stuff. We're out there to try and improve our photography. And there's always a bunch of different topics. There's always these different things. And so when challenges come up, the challenges are there to kind of give you an idea to try things out, and to work out what's really working, so that you can sort of improve your ability. Now, when we're coming to the notion of water, what we're talking about this week is water, fluid, liquid water, okay? I'm not going to be talking about ice. I'm not going to be talking about steam. These are separate issues. They tend to be, generally speaking, when there's a contest out there, a challenge of some kind, it says water, it's nearly always meaning liquid water. Now, quite often, because it's such a big topic, there will be a particular aspect. It might be water in rivers, or it might be water in vessels, or it might be using water, or some other kind of thing. But I'm going to kind of look at a broad range of different ways you can interpret the notion of water. And because it is very broad, what I would say is, if you're going to enter this water challenge that I'm setting for you, then it can seem very big. So this is why I said about the idea of maybe have a pen and pencil, or pen and paper handy, or pencil and paper. A pen and a pencil just on their own won't do any good. You do need something to write on. So a piece of paper, piece of card, any scrap that you can get hold of. And as I go through the images and I talk you through these different ideas, if something strikes you, if you suddenly go, oh, I like that idea, scribble it down, because there's got a lot of information, and the chances of you remembering everything that I say is fairly slim. Very, of course you can go back, you can rewind, the great thing about doing these podcasts on YouTube is that they are all recorded. You can go back and watch the other 197, or not in full, you can tap into them at any rate. You can scan back through, find previous topics, do in-depth, or just nip through. Most of them tend to have a little menu, so you can jump to the bit that you want to. So there's a massive resource of over 4 years of this podcast that you can go and tap into. But for this, I would say, just if I mention something you find interesting, scribble it down, make a note of it, and then come back to it afterwards as well. Right. Okay, so with that in mind, what I'm actually going to start with is, in fact, a piece of feedback, a piece of critique, which comes from Sandra. And the reason I'm doing this is because Sandra sent me, Sandra sent me an image, and she said, since you are doing a podcast about water on Sunday, what I thought, so let me just change that to that, and yeah, okay. So he says, I thought I would send you a photo on that topic. I was on holiday in Beadnell, and I was attempting to get that lovely misty water effect of the sea. I took a 2.5 second exposure, although this was nowhere near long enough. It was taken in the evening, more or less at sunset. So let me bring up the photo that Sandra sent, and you can see what she was up against. So this is the photo Sandra sent in. So we're on a water topic, but what I thought I would do is I'll deal with this bit first, because then what will also happen is it kind of taps on one aspect of the photography, which is an important aspect about photography, an important part about water, and then we can cover a lot of other aspects as well, rather than covering the other aspects and then doing this halfway through. So one of the other things that Sandra says is, I also found that another thing I found challenging about this was composition. Now, I don't know if there is a certain kind of beach where this type of photo works well, or whether I need to change the height I shoot at. Any advice you can give would be very welcome. So what we're talking about here then is the idea that, so what Sandra was attempting to do was, sometimes when you do long exposure pictures of water, they can start to look quite misty. And some of it, well, we've all pretty much seen out there these amazing photos that people do, especially near sunset, where sunset over the sea, you've got glorious colours, the colours being reflected, and you end up with this really kind of misty sense of water. So it does look more like steam or fog rather than liquid water, even though it is. And it's all to do with your shutter speed exposure. Now, Sandra did this at about 2.5 seconds, and what we can see from this is we're starting to get that sort of slightly misty effect, but it's not quite there yet. So how long do you actually need to get that effect? Well, a little while back, and I think I've repeated it not too many months ago as well, but I'll run you through this again. I did a little experiment just to sort of show you what happens when taking photo at different shutter speeds, and what I did was of water specifically. So there was a little stream that I took a photo, and it was under a bit of shade, and it was a little brook, and it was quite dark, but it allowed me to set up my tripod and just point it at this little bit where we've got water running over rocks, little bit of moss, little bit of a pool. And this particular photo was taken with a shutter speed of 1,000th of a second. It was f2.8, ISO 6400. But the main key thing that we're talking about here, not worrying so much about aperture and ISO, the main thing here is about shutter speed and how shutter speed affects water in particular, what we really notice. And when we're talking about 1,000th of a second, that the amount of that the water has moved from the point that the shutter opens to the point that the shutter closes is really very, very small indeed. And as such, all the little droplets of water end up really kind of getting caught. There's still a little bit of motion blur, but you've got bubbles coming up, you've got droplets flying about, and some of this just kind of, it's almost like ice, it's almost like glass, okay? We've got all these sort of frozen little bubbles of water. Look here, and now the ISO's very high on this because it was a very fast shutter speed in a low light situation, but you do get that sense of glass, almost that frozen water, so that every single droplet pretty much is available. Now that's at 1,000th of a second. Now what if we slow that down a bit? If we slow that down to say 640th of a second, okay, so about 2/3 of the speed. We go from that to that, and you notice that, I mean, particularly say you look around here, this part here, it goes from, it's now starting to blur a little bit. The waters, this is quite a fast moving little brook or stream, burn as you would say in summer, in Scotland rather, and so a 640th of a second isn't enough to get that crystallizing moment. When we go to 400th of a second, it's starting to blow a little bit more. We get to 250th of a second, and we can now see that 250th of a second isn't enough to freeze water to get that kind of glass or ice effect. Let's slow it down a bit further. 125th of a second is really starting to run into itself. 80th of a second, 30th of a second. Now 30th of a second on a fast running little stream, we're almost starting, we're getting this sort of smooth, really quite much smoother feel to it. It's smoothing out all the bumps that are happening within the water. We get to 10th of a second, it's getting even smoother. It's now starting to almost look like fine strands of hair. A quarter of a second, even more so. Half a second. Now at half a second, we're getting to places here where it's starting to almost think about becoming misty. A whole second, now it's starting to get that little bit more. We get to 2.5 seconds, and 2.5 seconds is what Sandra had for her sea picture. And at this point, it's not all complete mist, but there are places where it is becoming misty. It's smooth in that 2.5 seconds. In that 2.5 seconds, a bit of water that was up here would have come down, bounced off this rock, bounced off that rock, come down here, and probably be out of the picture. So this is quite a lot of water that there's not a single droplet that starts at the top that's still going to be in the bottom. Or if it has, it's kind of smeared, it's smudged its way all the way down. So all the water that's running through. So we're just about getting into this misty fine area. We're on the edge of it at 2.5 seconds. Then if we go to 6 seconds, it's much more now. And this is as fast, this is as slow as I could get it. By this time, because I was shooting in daylight and I didn't have a filter, an ND filter on my camera, the slowest I could get under these lighting conditions, I've now gone to ISO 100. I can't get any smaller than that. I've gone to f22. The lens I was using was as narrow aperture as I could possibly get. So 6 seconds was my maximum. Anything longer than this, and it just got too bright. Everything whited out. But at 6 seconds, we are now moving into quite misty territory. Okay, so that's what's happening with water. So when you move from 1,000th of a second down to 6 seconds, you move from it being captured really sharp, and it's still almost like a kind of bubbly glass sculpture, down to 6 seconds, and you're now starting to move into the realms of mist. But when you see those sea pictures where there's a lot of mist going on, when you come back to something like this, you probably need something in the realm of 30 seconds. Now, 30 seconds is a lot of light coming into your camera. Your camera's never really going to, and in daylight, you're just not going to be able to get that level of, it's going to white it. Now, at this point also, we don't have the colour in the sky. This looks like the sun's probably set a bit, but we've not got the beautiful kind of coloured clouds. And if you wanted to get that bit whereby you were wanting that beautiful colour the reds and golds in the sky, as well as the misty thing, you're not going to be able to basically do it with your camera without some kind of filter on the end. And at this point, you probably want to have a neutral density filter, an ND filter, and probably get yourself an ND, one that does at least 10 stops. Usually it's called like an ND 1000 filter, but you're looking for something like a 10 stop filter. Screw that onto the top of it, and that's like having almost welder's glass in front of it. It's like really, really, really thick sunglasses. So it's massively restricting the amount of light that comes in. Because it's restricting the amount of light that comes in, it means you can have your shutter speed, you can have your sensor open to the light much longer before it starts getting too bright. And that in turn will allow the sea to become much mistier. And ultimately, that's basically about the only way you can do that. If you're really wanting to get the misty sea, and you're wanting to get some kind of colours in the sky, you would have to have a filter. The only other way of doing it is to wait until it's even darker. That pretty much you're then kind of getting to night sky. And then if you're doing a night sky scene, so you shoot later in the evening, you shoot once the sun has gone down, maybe you'll be getting the street lights will have come on in the town by the sea, the houses, you'll have street lights on here. But at that point, maybe you can do a 30-second exposure, a 1-minute exposure, a 2-minute exposure, depending on how much light is about. And at that point then, so if you don't have a filter, you might need to be at night time. And then if there's enough light then reflecting off the street lights, then you might be able to see bits of the sea going misty. But you are going to run into that problem. So really, ultimately, Sandra, the filter is the way to go. Now, in terms of composition, trying to find an interesting kind of place, really what you're talking about here is what's going to make a good, interesting composition with a misty sea is also going to make probably you're looking for a good composition even without a misty sea. And with this one, the composition is relatively, it looks like you're using a wide angle lens. And one of the things with the wide angle lens, great, gives you more width, but it does tend to compress the height. So the buildings the horizon line here has gone very, very narrow, and there's not a lot really going on there. So what you've got is you've got half this picture is sky, but it's not the sky you're interested in. It's mostly the sea you're interested in. So what you really want to do is, if you're still wanting the horizon, a bit of the horizon, is to lower your camera so that the sky is only taking up a small amount of the picture. Unless you're trying to get the glorious sunset in the sky, you really want to have, it's the sea that you're interested in. You maybe also, ideally, want to go, if you went to a place whereby you had cliffs or something coming down the side, that you had something which was, whether it's cliff edges or trees or something to kind of frame the picture. Get down into the rocks. You could actually have other bits of rocks framing. I mean, if you were sort of down, depending, I don't know how much rocks you've got around here, but essentially if you kind of got down more at sea level and you're in amongst the rocks and allow some of the rocks to even kind of just come into the edge of the photo, you could maybe get some interesting things there. But I would also maybe steer away from the idea of the wide angle lens. Unless you've got a particular landscape which is going to work well for it. So ultimately then, Sandra, I hope that gives you a couple of ideas. So when it comes to trying to create that misty scene, shutter speed is what it's all about. And if you want to get a shutter speed of 30 seconds or more, you're going to have to be at a place where you've got to get a lot less light into the lens. And to do that in daylight, chances are what you're really going to need is an ND filter. Either that, or you're going to have to shoot at night, in which case you then run into the problems that you might not even see much of the sea anyway. And your composition, what you try go out during the daytime before you want to do it, and find a place which gives you a nice composition. Work out what the composition is going to be, and then go back to it, and then apply everything with your filter as well when the sun's in the right place to give you the colouring in the sky that you want. So I hope that gives you a few ideas there, Sandra. to play around with. But the key for everybody else, the main takeaway for this, is about understanding just how much difference it makes to water in particular is when you change the shutter speed. That a fast shutter speed means you can capture moving water and freeze it, but moving water with a slow shutter speed is going to make it look more misty. And both of these effects can be really quite powerful and worth playing with, because part of the fun of photography is that photography allows us to see the world in a way that we don't normally. So very simply, quite often just framing and deciding that we're going to capture a piece within this space forces us to look in this space without all the peripheral, and we see it in a different way. But certainly when it comes to things like shutter speed makes a huge difference, because we don't see water frozen and we don't see water long exposure misty. So either of these effects tend to look really different and really eye-catching to us. So they are both worth mastering. So hope that helps there. Okay, a couple more comments there about people talking about the temperature that's coming up. So Sandra says she really likes Susan says she really likes the foreground, and April says she likes the rocks. And I think getting down in amongst the rocks is possibly one of the ways to go with something like that. Okay, so thanks very much for that, Sandra. Thank you for sending that in, and I hope that's kind of given some ideas to everybody else. Quick little reminder here that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, or entertaining, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can help support the podcast. Now, okay, so where are we at now? So yes, let's move on then. So what we're going to talk about now then is water, and water with the idea of we're setting a water challenge, and now that challenge, this time you're getting 3 weeks. Okay, in the next 2 weeks I've got other things going on, so the water challenge will be for 3 weeks time, so you've got plenty of time to go out and try out lots of different things. So I'm really looking forward to seeing you being a little bit creative with this. Okay, so what I'm going to talk about, let's see, that's shutter speed, water for pictures. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to run through a whole bunch of different ideas of what you can do with water. If you want to leave comments, leave comments. Hopefully I'm going to start seeing comments coming up in my tablet here, rather than me just kind of flipping backwards and forwards through the whole time. But again, if you have questions, leave the questions, ask me the questions in the comments here. This is your chance to find out various bits and pieces as we go. Oh, Sandra's left a comment, says, thanks, Kim. I do have a neutral density filter, although I do find it gives an unwanted vignette. I will have another go when I'm in Anglesey and see if I can come up with a better composition. Okay, well, that's fair enough. And sometimes these ND filters can kind of vignette things a bit. Sometimes part of it depends on, I mean, I think the cheaper ones can be worse, but sometimes it's how it fits on your camera. Another option here is to shoot slightly wider than you expect to do, with the idea that you can crop the edges off a little bit. Obviously you don't want to crop in too much because you lose then too much information. But if you take the idea that you might actually essentially crop the equivalent of about 1 inch or something off around the edges, that will get rid of the worst of the vignette. So when you're composing, compose slightly bigger than you actually think you want. Gives you a couple more options to crop in. But like I say, not too wide, otherwise you'll lose too much information and then you won't necessarily have a picture that's going to work when it's printed full size. Right, so this idea then of water. Let's just start with straightforwardly a water. Now this one isn't trying to do the sea or so the misty sea. This is straightforwardly the sea. The sea, the biggest part of water on our planet. 2/3 of our planet is water. The surface is water. So it's a huge part of what we do. And unless you, well, I mean, if you're in Britain, you're never more than, I think even if you're in Birmingham, you're not more than about 100 miles from the sea. And if you're in Scotland, I don't think you're ever more than about 50 or 60 miles from the sea. Or certainly in Wales, I don't think you're any more than 50 miles from the sea. So, you know, you can get to the sea fairly. Now, I appreciate that if you're in middle America, then you can be 1,500 miles from the sea. In which case lakes and rivers are other options for you. We'll come on to that. But for the moment, there's the notion of sea. And so sea, again, sea on its own isn't really necessarily there, so you want to be looking for other aspects of sea. So in this case, down at the beach, we're sunset. This was a fairly quick photo, but colours in the sky, reflections on the wet sand, rocks coming into the composition. I've given this a wider, more cinematic crop, basically because above that little bit of cloud line there wasn't really anything much interesting in the sky. So I kind of cropped it down a bit to get where the essence is. So if you're doing the sea, going out there at, again, golden hour times, give you plenty to play with. You don't necessarily have to do colour. You can go to black and white. Black and white can often end up quite dramatic too. In this case, I mean, we've got sunshine coming down, creating sort of really white, lots of twinkly bits going on here. Waves crashing a little bit. There's an old broken jetty. Bits of concrete coming down here. Old bits of wood with rusty nails. And while I was there, of course, I was going in. I was playing around as we all would and getting close-up photos of rusty nails and all the rest of it. But there was also, the weather was constantly changing. You see this quite stormy sky. It's raining over in the distance. Got sun coming through. And so silhouette. Played a bit with silhouette of this playing around as well. So you've got the sea, but you can also play with light. Okay, that notion of playing with light, playing with colour, playing with black and white, playing with silhouettes. It's all there. It's all there for you to play around with. Now, you can have, so these are things with the sun out where it can be quite dramatic. But then you can also, this kind of thing gets very moody. Here we have a misty day. We've got it's dull. In fact, we're getting bits of snow. You can see snow. In fact, yeah, it is in fact snowing at that point. I remember this was in Northumbria. My wife in a place called Druridge Bay. In Northumbria, my wife and I were there, and it was sort of sleeting and snowing and dull and overcast. And we can actually see the snow is just where it's dark there, it's coming into it, bits of snow on the beach. But I really like this photo. There's this sort of bleakness to it. You've got a lone figure on the beach. It looks like somebody sort of walking along the seaweed line, looking for maybe interesting. It could be shells or stones or things caught in the seaweed. We've got rocks, we've got sea, we've got blank sky. Again, not a lot of sky, enough to know that it's overcast. So weather patterns with sea can make a lot of difference. Or likewise, stormy seas. Here, this was can't remember, I think this was Whitby in Yorkshire. And the weather was quite rough. I mean, we're not into those kind of Hawaiian big surfing, massive, 20-foot breakers or anything like that. But this is rough. If you were trying to swim out there, you would be getting tossed about all over the place. You would really feel it. You can see the wind kind of catching the spray as the waves are starting to break. The spray's flying backwards. A lot of noise with this. And getting one with the cliff tops in the background, again part of. So there's no sun to speak of. But everything's about just trying to get that feel of the action and allowing for that kind of. You can feel it. It's a cold, it's a cold wind. This, it's an overcast day. So the sea, then you can have calm, you can have rough. You can have sunny, you can have cloudy, you can have misty. You can even be out on the sea. So another one was out on a fishing boat and got a lighthouse in the background, a couple of seagulls flying about. And despite the fact that this looks fairly calm, the boat was rocking about all over the place from side to side. You can see I've got the horizon line straight here, but you can see that the back of the boat is at quite an angle. And actually, I wouldn't recommend, if you're on a rough sea, trying to take too many photographs. I've got pretty good sea legs, actually. I never really tend to get seasick, but I did on the boat. Once when I had having the camera to the eye, and then you're kind of rocking all over the place, I found actually did make me feel very seasick, and I had to stop taking photos very quickly. But again, it was a dull overcast day. The colours weren't much, but I found putting it into black and white just made it feel a little bit more dramatic. Sandra said I wouldn't want to be on that boat. Oh, April says I like the stormy scene, can feel the coldness. So yeah, you get rocked about a lot. But anyway, so there's that notion of you can be on the sides looking at the sea, or there's even the notion of the harbour as well. This is Port William. We've got the little kind of, in fact, actually this is the same fishing boat that I was out on in this here. Here the guy is just sort of setting up, getting a few things ready, sitting in the harbour before going out. In the background, we've got lifeboat sitting there ready to go as well. You can see now you can get a sort of sense of the sky, and that it was fairly, slightly stormy when we were out there. It wasn't dramatically stormy, but it was a bit choppy, certainly for only a boat that size. So that's another way you can do sea. You can be on the sides, you can be on top of it, you can be watching people preparing to go out or going out on the sea. And of course, another option, if you want, is under the sea. Now, I don't have an underwater camera. This one was taken in an aquarium. And in fact, actually, I've not been to an aquarium for a long, long time. This snap I managed to find in some really old folders and was taken way back before I even decided to become a photographer. But for the illustrations here, the fact is, if you have the equipment, you can take photos under the sea, under the water as well. Or if you go to an aquarium where it's well lit, you can get, some really interesting pictures of tropical fish or octopus or sharks or anything like that. So when we're talking about the notion of sea, there's lots of different ways you can tackle water with that. The key thing here, though, is that the water has to be a major part of the photo. And sometimes, this is about the coral and the water, but it's about water. If you put this into a water competition, that would be fine. This one, I would say, is kind of borderline. It is water, but it's more about the person and the boats and the setting than it is necessarily about the sea itself. But I think you could just about kind of get away with this. But it would a little bit would depend on the judges that you had. Whereas this is very much, this is out on the sea. We've got a little bit of the fishing boat and we've got a little bit of the headland, but the majority of the picture is the sea. And so, depending on your judges, very often if you're doing things like the ViewBug photo crowd, when you've got the crowd votes tend to be much more literal. And so you very often find that if you've got a competition with a title like water, a picture which has got more water in it will do better than a picture that's got less water in it, even if the picture with less water in it is potentially a better, more interesting photo. So it's worth keeping that in mind. Whereas if you're doing a judge control, where you've got like either an individual or just a handful of judges for a competition and it's water, then as long as it does fit the theme, the better taken photograph will tend to win or get marked higher up. Whereas with the crowd vote, it tends to be the one that has more water in it, which can be quite frustrating sometimes. But worth keeping that in mind. What's Robert said? If only I knew someone who did underwater photographs. Robert S. Okay, I think Robert has said to me, Robert Schaefer, who hasn't joined us today, but the other Robert from Texas actually has done a bit of underwater photography. Hopefully he will watch back this podcast and maybe be inspired to show us some of his, or to put one of his underwater photos in for the challenge. That would be interesting. Right, okay, so what else have we got? Then rivers. Okay, rivers, don't forget. If you do happen to be middle of America and several hundred or several thousand miles away from the sea, then rivers. There's usually a river kicking about somewhere. Now, this particular river happens to be up on Skye off the Western Isles of Scotland. So here we've got the river, we've got dramatic landscape now. So we've got the mountains behind, we've got an old stone bridge crossing the river, but there's hundreds of different ways you can do rivers. Rivers are kind of almost infinitely variable. I mean, earlier on I was showing you with the shutter speed bit just a really close-in bit of the river as well. Or like this river here, this is the River Thames in London. Very iconic, very popular angle to photograph the Thames, because you've got St Paul's Cathedral sitting here, and then we've got the bridge, I can't remember, is that the Millennium Bridge? All right, anyway, footbridge that crosses the Thames here, and you get this lovely leading line from the bridge to St Paul's Cathedral. I happened to be there just pretty much as the sun was going down. Got some really nice lighting when I happened to be down. This was, I don't know, probably about, yes, the Millennium Bridge, London Millennium Bridge, this one's called. So bridges over water, rivers, that's always quite a good dive. But then rivers can be kind of big and wide and estuary, or they can be at the tumbling part, even this bit, waterfalls as well, if you can get anywhere near waterfalls. And again, what you can see with this one is a longer shutter speed. I think this one, again, was something like about maybe 3 seconds, possibly 4. It certainly wouldn't have been more than that because it is daylight, but it was a very, very overcast day, and although we've lost some of the leaves, there was still quite a canopy. So with this one, I'll be at 100 ISO, f22, and probably about 4 or 5. No, certainly no more than 6 seconds. I could not have gone above 6 seconds with this, but I think looking at it from the other one, I would possibly say about 4 or so. And then that's starting to give us this sort of slightly misty sense of movement going on in the space. So waterfalls, again, but if you can do high shutter speed waterfalls and catch all the droplets together. What have we got here? Oh, Sandra says, lovely photo of sky. Janet says, I think I shot that bridge when I was in Scotland in 2014. So that'll be that one, yes. It is a popular bridge. If you've gone to Skye and you've driven about, chances are you will have come across this bit and you will have shot that bridge with a set of mountains in the background. I'm not claiming any originality here. I'm just using this as an example of what you can do for rivers. And Meg says, oh, London is my favourite place to be or to visit. Okay, so as well as rivers, there's a notion of lakes. So this one taken in the Lake District in Cumbria in the UK, in England. So now this has got a small lake and it's mostly landscape, and this kind of is where you fall into the potential danger whereby if the topic is water, if the topic is lakes, you could get away with this. If your topic is water, then probably slightly less so, because really the water is supporting the dramatic mountains and the light coming through. It's this part here, it's the upper part of this, which is really what the picture is about. The picture is about the mountains, and then the birds, the sunlight, even the sheep in the foreground here, and the lake are really supporting that. So you kind of got to be aware of that. And so if you're going to do something like a lake, you maybe want to be making more of the lake. This is, I can't remember the name of the lake, it's in Yorkshire, but there's a reservoir here. This is the dam on the side. So at this point then we've got a much bigger sense of lake, but again, a lake in itself, you need to be thinking about your composition, you need to be thinking about your boundaries, you need to be thinking about whether you've got leading lines or you've got reflections. We've got reflection of the sun going down into the water here. Well, again, it's an okay photo, this. I don't know that it's necessarily a great photo, but what I'm trying to do is just give you an example here of what you can do. Now, the other thing is with lakes is to think about the fact that we talked about the notion of shutter speed, but there's also the notion when you've got a body of water which is to do with movement on the water. And there's a slight breeze about, so we've got little waves going along. So we've got reflection of the sunlight in the water, but it's not a mirror-like reflection. However, when you get into a really calm day, something like this, so this is a place, Dalbeattie Woods, not too far from, about sort of 6 or 7 miles from where I live. There's a small little lake, loch, and There's a woodland path that you can walk around it. There's a bench. I'm on the other side of the loch from the bench. You can see the bench, you can then see the reflection, you can see the trees, you can see the reflection of the trees, and now we can start playing around with the notion of mirroring. And mirroring can be a lot of fun with water. You know, you can have fun with mirrors too, but with a water challenge, the great thing about water is if you can get a calm lake or loch or river, then you can get these reflections going on and you can get these particular kinds of effects. You can also do it at night. Nighttime is a fun time for if you've got a really still night. This one up at Loch Ken. Got the stars in the sky, a little bit of glow on the horizon, and then we've got this sort of it was a really, really still night. I can't remember how I haven't got things up here for the exposure, but we're starting to get to, I mean, it could have been a 30-second exposure or something like that, because we're starting to get the stars are you know, starting to smear across the sky here. They're not complete little dots, so it's not very sharp. It also looks like we've got a plane or something with its lights going off as it's moving across the sky here. But because it was quite still, that on 30 seconds we were, I mean, smeared, yes, but we were still actually getting some reflections of stars in the water, which is quite interesting as well. Okay, also a couple of comments here. What else have we got? Oh, John says shooting waterfalls in slow motion is a favourite of mine. Well, excellent. Well, if you don't come up with something else, I certainly expect to see one of those from you, John. Susan says plenty of opportunities in Scotland, John. We have loads. Well, we certainly do. April says I love the smell of lakes. Nadia says to Sandra, some photographers get a bigger ND filter than their lens size and then use a step down attachment to reduce the vignette of the image. Okay, now that's an interesting idea. That yes, there are various gadgets you can get. You can get the ND filters, which you kind of essentially screw onto the front of the lens. You can also get these kind of gadgets where you kind of fix everything on, and then you can kind of place a sheet into them. And then depending on what other things you've got, so yes, there can be ways that you can get around it. But at that point, I would say go and Google it. It's not my speciality. I can't really give you any more information you could find by Googling. My ND filter is one that I just screw onto the end of the camera, and I tend to find it does the job that I want it to. But that's an interesting idea, that Nadia. Thanks for mentioning it. April says pretty night shot. Then we've got this idea of fog as well, mist. And if you get, so this one is a misty day and it's a very calm day, and we end up with some really interesting mirrored reflections. Again, because on a misty day, the colour tends to get sucked out. Quite often going black and white is a nice way you can play around with something like that as well. But it doesn't have to be. You can also bridges. Bridges are another one. Now, in this case, we've got a river, and the arches over it tend to give us almost a complete circle. With this, playing around with, it's a fairly calm. It's not as calm and as this one. This one was, I mean, it's absolute mirror-like. But this is placed in Dumfries, and there's another bridge behind Devagilla Bridge. It's a much older bridge is behind there, which you can then see through the arches. But we've got this one. I'm on the embankment. I'm leaning out with the phone for basically as far as I can to try and get this as kind of a straight on as I can to get this kind of mirroring effect. But here we're also making the most of the fact that it is clear blue skies as well. So it's quite a colourful image, this one. John says he loves the mist shot. Then what else we got? Yes, I mean, other options. You don't just have to necessarily go full mirroring, partial mirroring. This one, trying to remember where this, Argyll, I think it was, over on the west coast of Scotland. Not actually out in this. There's an inland. Well, there was a sea loch that kind of came up, and then there was this wonderful old ruined boat wreck, but it was quite water was quite calm at that point. And here we've got a really nice kind of triangular then reflection going on, and it's not a complete smooth reflection in the way that the last couple of images were. We've got seaweed in the foreground breaking up part of it, but I think that also adds an extra piece of texture. You know, we're now kind of into the kind of asymmetrical symmetry aspect that I've talked about before. So we're getting the reflection, we're getting symmetry, but it's also broken up by other elements, which kind of also I think makes it interesting. So John said he loved the mist shot, and April says the northeast it has a good number of waterfalls, not to mention the famous Niagara Falls. Well, of course, Niagara's a biggie, you know. If you can get to that one, lots to photograph there. That's true. Wildlife as well. Get a duck on a pond. Always worth playing around, or young swan. Now, interesting difference between these two here. Sun out, colourful. You've got the duck, you've got the colours, but you've also got the reflections of the trees, you've got the reflections of the sky. So they've got a lot of other reflections going on in the water. We're very clear as well. This duck seems to sort of, it's got a kind of, it's probably sitting relatively still, or it's just sort of stopped or something. So it's got ripples going out from it in all directions. It's got ripples going to the front of it as well as behind it. It sort of seems to be sitting almost like it would sort of drop straight down into it. Whereas this one, although in essence a very, very similar shot, bird in the water being reflected, here it's got like a tiny little kind of bow wave at the front, and we know that it's moving forward because we've got the one kind of V wake behind it, and a little bit more here at the back where the feet are obviously the paddling that bit more. What's also interesting is because it's a dull day, this is a grey sky, all the water, there's no, and it's a slightly bigger lake, whereas this one was taken in Dalbeattie, the loch in Dalbeattie Forest, where there was a lot of trees close around. This one was taken at Carling Walk Loch in Castle Douglas, where it's much wider out. And so if you're shooting down and you're not near any trees, then you end up with the fact that the grey sky just becomes this kind of all-around reflection. And it's only in a way, really, the fact that you've got this wave here. I mean, you know, the reflections, the detail in the reflection is quite astonishing. It's a very, very smooth piece of water. And the only ripple is where it's actually happening with the bird itself. And so without that, you would almost not know where the water ends and the sky begins. Now, you can also take that idea, especially if you've got a misty day, where you can get quite abstract. I mean, here I've got reeds in the water, and this was on a misty day where everything was... And again, if you're now starting to look to, well, where's the water? Because if we're looking over on the left here, you can't see where the water is and where... But if we zoom in, you can just about see the little bits where the water tension comes up against the plants, and then the reflections are darker. So the green leaves here are looking darker, slightly more silhouetted in the water. But we have this fantastic level of symmetry and almost abstract level. So if you can get down to, really, you can get to a lake or a pond when it's misty and it's really still, you can get the most amazing reflections from reeds, from plants, from wildlife, even from little insects that scurry around on the water. So that's another great one for playing around with where water is concerned. What else have we got? Oh, Nadia liked the boat picture, and so did April. Right. Another thing, okay, so that's all about big bodies of water, but you can even get reflections or in puddles. Now, this is just a kind of quick one. Interestingly, with this photo, if you take away the puddle like that, it still works as a photo. It's an old army truck, but I think actually that bit of puddle there with the reflection in it just sort of adds something extra to this photo in a way that without it, it's like I say, it still works, but it doesn't work quite as well. Now, that's a little bit of water, and if you put that into a competition saying water, obviously that wouldn't work as such because it's really about the truck. But I did want to point out the idea that you can use puddles as kind of an extra level of texture effect. But if you take something like this is where there's kind of a much larger puddle. This was taken with my phone just while I was out for my walk a few months ago. You can see by the tree that it's the middle of winter. And just getting right down to ground level, pavement level, sidewalk level if you're in North America here, and then we've got the post box, mailbox just there, and catching that in the reflection as well. Houses are reflected, name of the streets and drives reflected, and we're really getting that lovely kind of mirroring effect, but it's just literally from a puddle. And you can play around with this puddle idea if you've got a leaf or something floating in the puddle, if they've got somebody walking past. There's also, of course, if you really want to risk it, if you've got a car driving through it and splashing the puddle. So puddles are another place. You don't necessarily have to be able to go off to wild rivers and distant and large lochs and seas and everything else. Just after a wet day or a couple of wet days, getting out with your camera or your phone and getting down very low, you can do some interesting things with puddles. So that's another good option. And talking of rain, if you've got a large landscape with rain coming in over the top, we've got a lake here, or kind of dammed river actually. This is part of where the hydroelectric system kind of builds up further up the valley from here. So rain coming in, loch water, distance, so big dramatic landscape kind of thing. But you don't have to worry about rain necessarily being big dramatic landscape. You can also look at the notion of, again, don't think this was puddle. I think this was actually slightly flooded woodland. The river had broken its banks and gone over into some trees. But you can get, where the raindrops are falling, you get all these fantastic ring shapes. And so playing around with the notion of ripples, getting in close, and at this point this becomes pretty abstract. So if you're going for the notion of abstract and water, playing around with ripples and the reflections within that is another great kind of fun place to play around with water. April said very vivid swan reflection, and Sandra also liked the swan reflection and likes the misty mountain background too. Another thing with rain hits the window, and taking a photo of the raindrops on the window could be quite interesting. This was taken literally out of that window there, and it was taken in the evening, just as sun's starting to go down. It's getting dark. This is the library across the road. The light was on in the library. There's a monkey puzzle tree sits outside, and so that's what's giving us. So we're getting this sort of silhouetted shape, but the colours, interesting because when you end up with these water droplets, they tend to invert the image. So you kind of got an inverted bit of the library with the sky bit underneath, and that's what gives us all these sort of wonderful kind of shapes. So literally raindrops on the window, especially if you've got an interesting shape behind, can be an interesting one to play with. So now we move into the world of droplets, okay? And water droplets. Now again, fast shutter speed here. So we've got a fountain, and I think it was a fountain. It might have even been raining slightly while I shot the fountain as well. So these bits are hanging down almost like lichen off a tree, frozen moments of water splashing down into a fountain. That's kind of going from the edge of fountain, or you can kind of, but I've got the fountain more of a kind of symmetrical thing, got it in the middle. You can see a bit of the building behind it, but all the water that's flowing off it, because this is a fast shutter speed, have been sort of frozen droplets like that. Now, if you're going, now that's droplets as they're falling, but you can also then have the after effects, the droplets. So droplets on a grass. Get out into the garden, or even if you don't have much of a garden, but you've got a little space where you've got a potted plant or something. Droplets onto the grass, onto the leaves, could be quite interesting as well. And again, they often act as like little magnifying glasses on a texture, or they sort of show up bits of the scene. You've got, it's kind of gone out of focus in the background, but it's sharper within that. It's it's like a kind of lens ball effect. Tulip, looking straight down. So again, the rain's been there. we've got the water droplets. So water droplets on flowers are one of these kind of things that very often make a flower more interesting. I know we've talked before about this. Susan in particular does a lot of flower photography, and we talked about the idea of going out with spray. In fact, actually I'll come into that in a moment. With this one, you can, so this is sweet pea in the garden, so rain, it's all very wet, got these wonderful kind of blobs of water over it, but you can also go macro, you can go really right close up. So this is the same sweet pea, and you can just really get in close with all the thing, with the with your like a macro lens or something like that. But droplets, as well as sitting on things, can show up things that sometimes you don't see. So you take a spider web, and here it comes out in all its glory. Then we have this sort of wonderful kind of all these little jewels almost hanging off a spider web here. And it really makes the spider web show up when it's got all these tiny little droplets on it. Now that's where you've got a whole bit of web, but sometimes you can even have something like a very fine piece of web. This one again taken on a misty day, and there was these little droplets, and again just the same, the little bit of railing across. You can see the same shape here of we have a monkey puzzle tree and the library, but you've also got the misty sun just kind of right in the background. You've got these fantastic little, and they're just showing up on a tiny couple of threads. It's not like it's not as dramatic as the web back here. You've got the thin bit of web, and again a very narrow depth of field. Everything just sort of picking out these little jewels. So water can sometimes be this as well, but you can also sometimes focus in on the single droplet as well. Here we have some tulips in the garden, and there's a pink tulip behind, and the green, this tulip here hasn't quite opened up yet. It's still got a kind of green surroundings of it. There's a little bit of calendula just the other side of it, and here we can see sort of the world inverted through the droplet as well. So we can kind of create this quite abstract area of pink, area of green, and then this little blob here, which is sort of the little world contained within. Oh, April says, oh, I love flowers with water drops, and so cool. So here, this is something like just a common daisy on the lawn. Now this is where we get into the point whereby actually what I did was I played with a spray bottle. Okay, let me show you a couple more like this. This is a dandelion, a single little seed, sort of sitting with the head of the dandelion, with the full yellow dandelion behind it, but playing around with a macro lens with this and little water droplets, and you're getting fantastic bokeh kind of effects when you're playing around with that. Wide, very wide aperture. With this, it looks like it's raining. We've got backlight, so the sun is behind it, and it looks like it's raining, but it isn't rain. This is going back to Susan's trick where you get a water spray bottle, okay, and then now you can put the spray and sort of coat your flower so it's got droplets on it ready for when you take it, or you can essentially imitate the rain. Either you hold the camera in one hand, or you have the camera on a tripod, and then use the spray behind it or over it, but have a backlight. And especially if you've got a backlight and a slightly darker background, you can get this kind of rain effect. And again, wide aperture, get a really beautiful bokeh effect. Sandra says, how do you get the flower? Again, there's a blob over, so I can't read the whole line. How do you get the flower? Something in a water drop. And again, the water drop itself will act like a little lens ball. If you focus on the water droplet, then essentially what happens is everything that's behind it becomes in focus. It's like focusing on a little bit of magnifying glass in a way. So everything else can be kind of blurred, but what's inside the water drop suddenly becomes sharp, though it will always be inverted as well. Now, just to give you this was an old photo that I pulled up, but last night I thought, well, okay, let's just go. So I nipped out with the phone just to show you what's going on, that you can do this. Here you go. So I'm holding my phone with one hand and the water spray with the other, and then squirting. And now I've got the sun's going down in the back. This was in the evening, nipped out in the evening, saw some light in the garden coming in, and so I'm spraying these little geraniums here, and just to show you what that looks like, then here we go. So I've then kind of come down with the phone, and now I'm actually, so this one I've taken it wide to show you what's going on, and then this one I've actually come down, so I'm squeezing with this hand and then holding the phone in my hands here and sort of pressing the thing with my thumb just to get that. And this is, again, very quick photo. If you want to, and doing it on my phone, if you want to control the shutter speed, which I can't, you can either stick your phone on manual or use your big camera, your SLR, your DSLR, or your mirrorless, stick it on a tripod, and then set your ISO and your timer and your shutter speed and your aperture and everything else, and then do the spray stuff that's going on. And then that way you can get this kind of effect of the rain or the spray drops coming down. You've also, depending on how long you've been doing this, will make an effect of how many droplets are sitting on the flower itself. Susan says, I put a flower behind the water drops. Sandra, it takes practice, but it's not too difficult. Sandra says, I love the water sprayed flowers. Okay, another thing you do with water, straightforwardly, is somebody drinking it. This is another option. There's the notion of human interaction with water. So far, everything we've done is just water that's out there. But if you have a person you can work with, or you're with other people, or there's that notion of water is very much a part of life. So somebody drinking water, for example. Here we've got a bunch of people standing by water. The very first shot I showed you down at the sea, it's a place called Carrick. This was another shot down in the same place, Carrick, different day. But I was taking some photos of people and they were all lined up on the shore. And so I've gone for the whole kind of silhouette. So down at the sea, or you can have people on the water. Some of you may remember I've shown this picture before when I was out with Nith Inshore Rescue, kind of a bit like the lifeboats. But here, you've only got to look at that horizon to realise just how tilted we were when I was kind of clinging on to that. But I've got a wide angle lens on the camera. I'm holding it with one hand. I'm clinging on to a bit of rope on the boat for dear life as we're going at high speed up the river. And I was trying to get this sort of wonderful S shape in the wake as well. But that notion of being on the river, on the water, so people on the water is another thing you can do, or people in the water. At this point, the boat is being guided back into, it's going to be taken out of the water. This guy's leapt over, and you really get that feel of being immersed in the water with this. Or for that matter, someone swimming. This was a friend of mine who was doing a triathlon thing, and up at Loch Ken again, they were sort of out in the water. So there's all these different ways that you can approach water. For that matter, there was also this one here, took several years ago, when the River Ken burst its banks and there was sort of a lot of flooding going on. And this is Kenbridge Hotel. Woman here scooping water out from the kitchens to pour back into a river which is already flooded. So that human interaction with water, I think, can be a really interesting one, and a really interesting way of getting something interesting going on with a photo. And finally, I mean, for that matter, if you really don't want to leave the house, some of you may remember this one, you can have a cup in a sink, right? I mean, washing up. You've got water in the house. You've got a basin full of water and a cup sticking out of it. So with all that, hopefully then, I've given you some ideas. Maybe some of you might have, like I say, made a couple of notes, or you can go back and flick through it and just kind of get some ideas. So water from big bodies of water like sea or rivers or lakes, that notion of reflections that can happen when you've got very still water, and again, whether that's in lakes or rivers or puddles even. the notion of droplets, whether it's rain falling on the window, whether it's rain falling onto flowers, or whether even if with the droplets that you can't, that you decide to create your own droplets with your own water spray going on. You can do macro and get really close up. You can do wide angle and get great big landscapes with dramatic weather patterns and rain and lakes and everything going across. You can have people drinking water, playing on water, being in the water, being by the water. You can do fast shutter speeds and capture water splashes and little droplets kind of frozen in time. You can do slow shutter speeds and get that misty effect and that notion of that feeling of movement and softness in the water. So there are so many, many, many different ways that you can play around with water. Hopefully today then I've given you some ideas of ways to go about it. So what are we going to do with this? All this information? You're going to enter the challenge. I know you're going to enter the challenge. I'll be disappointed with you if you don't enter the challenge. So you've got 3 weeks. You've got 3 weeks now to take some of these ideas, to rewatch this bit of video or scribble your notes and go check Pinterest, check Google Images, go and check other competitions on PhotoCrowd and what have you, and see what people are doing and come up with your own idea of what you're going to do with water. And I want you to be creative with this. Water has to feature, and it has to be liquid water or fine long exposure, short exposure, but I'm not talking about ice and I'm not talking about steam. Fine if you want to get a mist effect from a long exposure, but I'm not talking about photographing steam. So find something, there's an aspect which is find something interesting for you. I mean, I said John says almost too many ideas. And this is why it's what appeals to you. Some things will appeal to, some people might go, oh, personal water. That, oh, I'm going down to the beach. I'll take photos of people, swimming or surfing or paddling. Other people won't be interested in people at all. Or I'm landlocked, I've got to stay in the house for the next 3 weeks. Well, what have I got in the house? Can I do something with a dripping tap? Can I do something with a wash basin? Can I, do I even want to set up something where I do little droplets coming down and try and do those splash photography kind of things? There's lots of ideas. It's about what appeals to you. What aspect of water do you think you could do and just kind of makes you go, oh, that sounds a bit exciting, right? So that's what I want from you. So you've got 3 weeks now to come up with an idea and create a photo and get it through to me. Try and get it through to me within at least a few days before. So what would that be? That would be the 5th of July. Let me just double check that. 7th of July. Yeah, so 7th of July will be the podcast going out. So try and get this to me by the beginning of July. Okay? I'll run up to the 5th of July, but really don't leave it later than that. Robert says, Susan says, lots of ideas. I'm working on it. Robert says, happy Father's Day, Kim. Oh, thank you. I hadn't realised how many options there were for this challenge. There are no excuses for not entering. April says she wants to see one of John's waterfall pics as well. Okay, so lots of ideas there. So what are we going to do in the couple of weeks in between? Well, like I say, next week then we are going to be looking at group photography. Okay, so VG really wanted to know about group photography. So that's going to be the big thing for VG. So next week, I've done portrait challenge. I've done self-portrait challenge. I'm not going to do a group portrait challenge, but a lot of people want to know about, well, what do we do? We've got to get the family together, and we're just having them all standing in a line looking faintly awkward isn't very interesting. So what can you do when you've got 3 people, 5 people, 7 people, 100 people? How can you arrange them so that it looks a little bit more interesting than just all standing in a line like some kind of bizarre firing squad? So next week then is going to be all about group photography. Now in 2 weeks' time is going to be the 200th episode. So what are we going to do to celebrate the 200th episode? I will talk about this again next week, but basically what I've decided is I want a best of from you, right? The best photo you've taken in the last 4 years. Since these podcasts began, which was in April 2020, what's been the best photo you've taken? I want you to raid your archives, or maybe you're even going to create your best one in the next week or two doing the water shot, in which case that's fine too. But I want you to raid your best. What I would also like you to do is, for some of you, if you've created a photo where you feel that, part of getting a good photo was because of the feedback you got from these podcasts, then let me know. I really would like a nice little bit of feedback to know that after doing 200 of these episodes, that maybe something of what I've said has rubbed off a little bit. Just to make me think that I'm not sitting here just doing all this for no reason whatsoever. So if you've done particularly well out of some piece of advice that I've given you, I'd like to know that. But ultimately, the 200th episode is going to be a celebration of your photography. What's the best, most wonderful photo that you've created? Send it to me ready for, and that'll be for the 30th of June. So in 2 weeks' time, on the 30th of June, we're going to have the 200th anniversary, which will be a celebration of the best of your photography. Okay, and we'll go through that and we'll enjoy that. And then the following week, on the 7th, we'll look at the images sent in for the water challenge. Okay, so I hope that all makes sense. Last couple of comments here. What have we got? Oh, Janet says, I have an idea to try on July the 1st, so it might be early July for my submission. That's fine, as long as it's a good few days before the 7th. That's no problem at all. Sandra says, the challenge will be to decide what type of water photography to do, as there are lots to go for that you're interested in. We'll play around and send me your best one. Right, okay. Janet says start date is June 2020. Actually, it's April 2020. April 2020 is when I started these podcasts. So if you've got a fantastic photo from March 2020 or before, not included. Okay, just from 20. But I would expect some of your best photos to really be probably more recent than that. Chances are, I would hope that you have improved in your photography over the past 4 years. Right, okay, I think that pretty much draws us to a close. Thank you, Sandra, for sending in the photo of the beach and giving us the chance to talk about what happens when you change the shutter speed and if you're what you might need to do if you're wanting one of those long exposure effects down at the beach. Thank you to everybody else who's turned up, who's left a live comment, and I really look forward to seeing what your how you're going to respond to this water challenge. There are so many different options. There's got to be something in there which you think, I could have a go at doing that. I would have fun doing that. Maybe try a few of them, but then send me your best one. Okay. Right. That's it. Thank you once again. See you all next week, and when we will be talking about group photography. Until then, take care. Bye bye.